a good hitter. He came up to the big league as an outfielder.
In 1914, he was a member of the Boston Braves miracle team that started in last place in July, ended up winning the pennant and the World Series against the Philadelphia Athletic in 4 games. And Joe Connolly hit .309 for that team that year and was a star.
He played left field for the 1914 World Series, Boston Braves. The year in 1914, he was leading hitter on the team. I think that year he had 9 home runs. In those days, you didn't hit a home run over the fence. It was all running out home runs.
The next great name in Manville baseball came right out of Manville. Young man born on Railroad Street. The name he went by then was Clément Labine, but we all know him as Clem Labine.
And the first scout that looked at him was at the New Village. He told him, he says, "You're a born natural." Then they kept watching him.
He was working in the mill in Manville when he was picked up by the Brooklyn Dodgers, and this was 1944. But he never went to the Dodgers right away because of the war. He joined the military and came back in '46, and then went to the Dodgers training camp and became a very notable relief pitcher for the Dodgers. He also started many games, but mostly in relief. And he was a member of the Boys of Summer of 1955 when the Dodgers won their first World Series. And I remember Casey Stengel being asked, what were the factors in the Yankees losing the series? And the first thing he said was Clem Labine and his damn curveball. And I met Clem for the first time in 1951, the winter of 51-52. He came to our house to give a clinic to the Little Leaguers. And of course it was cold in the middle of the winter. And we used the basement of our house, which had very high ceilings, and it was at least 60 feet long. And he gave us a clinic on how to pitch there. And I remember asking him about his curveball. I said, well, why do you have such a great curveball? And showed me his hand, and his index finger was bent. And he said, I can grip the ball better with that bent finger than most pitchers, and I can put a better curve on the ball. And I remember him, giving us that clinic, and that was very special. I remember the Manville town team when I was a little kid. My mother had made me a uniform to match those of the team, and it said Manville across the front. And I was a bad boy. In 1947, I was a bad boy for the Manville town team, but I couldn't have been very good. I was too small. But I remember some of the players on that town team were superb players. We had a catcher by the name of Jerry DeLille. Jerry was one of the most powerful hitters ever. Our field at Memorial Park had a left field was probably 350 feet, a right field maybe 320, but the outfield fence went straight out to center field. So the center field must have been way over 400 feet, and Jerry could hit it over the center field fence. That's how powerful he was. He was recruited by the majors, but he never signed. We had a very great first baseman by the name of Jim LeWin, tall, lanky, played a terrific defensive first base and could hit. And a pitcher by the name of Willie Bernier. Now, Willie was signed by the St. Louis Cardinals and was never brought up to the big team, but he was a great shortstop and a good pitcher. Threw a knuckleball. So we've had some ball players that came out of Manville, no doubt about it.
Arthur Milo started Little League Baseball in Northern Rhode Island.
The very first year of Little League Baseball in Northern Rhode Island was 1951, and there were only 6 teams.
Claude remembers one of the games in the playoffs that first season.
And we played against Kiwanis. And Kiwanis was pitching the very best pitcher in the league, a guy by the name of Carney. Big kid, threw a fastball. Well, we demolished them, 10-0. Not only that, but our pitcher was Roger Gladue, and he pitched the first no-hitter in the history of Little League Baseball in Northern Rhode Island. So it was a great triumph for us. We knew we were the best team in the league, even though we didn't win the championship. It's a great way to end the season. And from then on, the Little League just exploded in Northern Rhode Island. And one of the nice things is that following that first year, my father was honored at a banquet in Woonsocket and given a plaque that said he was the father of Little League Baseball in Northern Rhode Island. And that was one of the most treasured things he ever had in his life.
Many other sports were popular in Manville as well. On July 9, 1948, Norman and Juliet Canoya's daughter Claudette was tragically killed while crossing the road near Chicks on Winter Street.
It was Friday, and Mother was preparing the meal with French fries, fish and French fries, and she hadn't started on the French fries yet. But Claudette said, "Ma, can I go get some ice cream?" Well, Chicks, it was Chicks store anyway. And she wanted to get 2 cones of ice cream, one for her and one for Leo, my son. He was 2 years younger than her. Right at where the store was there, the hills going up, there's an intersection there, and everybody revs their motor to make that hill, so they ignored the intersection. And there were guys tossing ball, playing ball, so there was so many distractions. And she stepped on the gas to make the hill, and that's coming out, and she just get in front of the car, halfway up the hill. Ulrich Polke on top of the second floor, that 10-family house, he came down with a blanket to put her on. Dr. Thibault, it was right there. And they rushed over there to get him, and he did the best to get there, but said, "Oh no." She was only 4 years old.
Manville has always had an excellent fire department, all volunteers. This could not have happened without the Manville Jenks Mill. People who worked in the mill had to wear a badge, and the workers who were firemen wore a special badge with a different color. When the fire whistle blew, the workers with the fireman's badge were allowed to go fight the fire and still get paid. Since most of the people in Manville worked at the mill, it would have been very hard to fight fires without the mill workers. First fire station was located at 52 Central Street. The building was owned by Francis Xavier Delisle. The new station was later built on Old Main Street, where it is now.
When I was a little boy, they used to pull the wagon to the fire. When they did that, they'd all get together and pull the wagon to, mostly those days was mostly brush fire. They didn't have as many fire in those days. They probably had 30 or 40 fire a year, you know.
This is the Manville Fire Department as they looked on June 19, 1923, when they were called out to fight a fire at Prospect and Central Streets. It is believed that children playing in a hayloft started the fire. When flying sparks started a small blaze at nearby St. James School, 500 children had to be evacuated. The fire destroyed a large blacksmith shop, 2 garages, and a barn. Attempts were made to rescue 2 horses in the barn owned by Emery Peliquin, but they became panic-stricken in the flames and perished in the blaze.
There was no truck. The first fire truck that the Manville Fire District was in 1923.
For many years, the Roy family ran Roy's Blacksmith Shop on Old River Road. Alfred Roy's business ended abruptly when the building caught fire on February 6, 1948.
When Saukett Fire Department came to help us, it was February, in February 1948.
Firemen were forced back several times as burning shingles were seen flying in all directions by the exploding of carbide gas inside the building. Jean and Paul were almost killed that day. They were fighting the fire in front of the building when the wall of the shop started to collapse. Captain Alfred Gladue and Paul's son Morris saw the impending danger and raced towards Jean and Paul, yelling frantically at them to get out of there.
We almost got killed that day. when the building fell down, we were right there. If Morris wouldn't have pulled me and his father out of the building, we would have been killed. As that close we got, right at our feet. Oh my God.
On June 30th, 1956, a fire started in a barn on Summer Street. Within minutes, the whole barn was ablaze, and it quickly spread to a number of buildings, including a 3-family tenement house on Winter Street. The fire raged out of control for 2.5 hours.
Around noontime, the fire whistle blew. I just happened to be right next to the fire station when it blew because I was delivering groceries for my father. I was the first one in the fire department, in the fire station. And the lady upstairs yelled that it was George Roy's barn. Then everybody came and we went down Summer Street, and it was a real inferno. It was George Roy's barn on Summer Street. And that fire could have burned down half the village. It was some kind of a miracle that it didn't burn down. It involved about a dozen buildings, about 3 or 4 of them which were burned completely. In that fire, Chief Henry Fortier was pinned between 2 buildings, the original fire building and Ben's Lunch, the building that was on fire. The wall fell on him, and he was pinned underneath for a while. 3 firemen, including his son, went over there and lifted the side of that building, and somebody pulled him out. After the fire, those same 3 people went over there and tried to lift that same piece of building that they lifted before, and they couldn't budge it. So that's, the chief survived with a broken collarbone, I believe. Also in that fire, we had a newlywed on our fire department. It was Ben Beanett. He'd just gotten married. He lived right across the street from where he was fighting the fire, and you could see his building burning, and his apartment in particular was burning, and he never left his post. He kept fighting the fire. Somebody else took whatever furniture they could out of his apartment, but he never left his post. There was 269 men that fought. They weren't all firemen, but they were all volunteers. That's a lot of people fighting one fire, 269. And there was panic. I remember the building that Norman Canoia lived in. I remember it couldn't be saved, and the people knew it. So the people who lived there ran inside the building. They tried to save as much stuff as possible, but they panicked. They threw everything out the window. I remember them throwing dishes out the window. It's a fire panic.
This was the second time Norman Canoia was burnt out of his home. The first time was in 1941 when he was a newlywed living on Reservoir Avenue.
Yeah, talk about bad luck. That was and they said that we burned down. That was the second time we burned down. Was on Winter Street. And there was 3 families there. We lived at the bottom, Mr. Shania on the second. Oh boy, I don't know what we did to deserve it, you know.
And that was probably the most dangerous fire we've ever had. It could have burned the village down.
The Red Cross, veterans organizations, churches, and other agencies provided relief efforts to help the 15 families made homeless by this terrible fire in the summer of 1956. In February 2001, a tragic fire claimed the life of 87-year-old George Rowe, owner of Veterans Furniture Store on Old Main Street. This building was once the primitive Methodist church built in 1899. When the congregation dwindled, George bought the old church in 1963 and converted it into a showroom for his furniture store. Sadly, this historic building was totally destroyed. 9 days later, at 1 a.m., fire erupted in the mill complex of the former NAFTA textile mills on Old River Road. Back in 1887, this was a thriving mill. Russell Handy produced cotton plush hair, and it was known as the Contrexville Manufacturing Company. The fire completely gutted the old mill and office complex, and it had to be demolished.
Among Manville legends, there were two people. You didn't even have to know their names. All you had to say was Derek or Fofo, and they were the two toughest men in the village of Manville. One of the legends is, one day, two boxers came from Central Falls to fight Derek. They heard he was tough. Derek took on both men at the same time and showed them who was boss. A month later, the men came down from Central Falls and shook his hand. They respected him. There is a legend about Fofo. During a dispute, it is said that he held a man by the shirt and dangled him over the Manville Bridge. Some say it happened to a state trooper or a National Guardsman during the 1926 strike at the Manville Mill.
They had the state trooper there, and the story was one of the guys from Manville, I guess they wanted them to get out of there, and he took a state trooper and held him over the edge of the bridge, over the railing.
Luigi LaCroix was a barber, inventor, and hypnotist. He created quite a commotion one day when he was seen sitting in a wheelbarrow being wheeled almost the whole length of Railroad Street by John Frezza. It seems these two men made a political bet in the 1960 presidential election. When John F. Kennedy won the election, Luigi won the bet, and John, a Republican, had to pay up. Walking beside him is make-believe policeman Bill Terrian. Hundreds of people line the sidewalk to witness the event, and a police cruiser headed the procession on this very unusual day in Manville's history.
An interesting character in the village was a homeless man named Adolphe Deduisseau, but everyone knew him as Tidolphe. One morning in the mid-1940s, this homeless man got off the train at the Manville Depot looking for work. Alfred Roy gave him a job working in his blacksmith shop and let him stay in the shed in the back of the barn. When the blacksmith shop burned in 1948, Tidolphe lost his home and his job. The Rouleau family extended kindness to him by allowing him to stay in a shed in their backyard. Actually, this shed was once an outhouse for the brick blocks, and when indoor plumbing was installed there, the outhouses were given to people and used as sheds. Well, Tidolphe lived in this converted outhouse, and the Rouleau family fed him and washed his clothes, and he worked doing odd jobs. One day that building burned, and the Rouleaus let him stay in an empty chicken coop. Everybody remembers Tidolphe and the kindness given to him by the villagers.
Manville was once the home of a notorious person known as the Great Imposter. His name was Ferdinand Waldo Demara Jr. and was born in Massachusetts. Fearing his teenage son was losing his religion, his father sent him to Manville in 1936 to live in the rectory with his uncle, Reverend Francois Demaris, the pastor of St. James Church. His stay at the rectory did not help, for during his life he deceptively assumed a variety of roles. Without any training or knowledge, he impersonated a doctor of psychology, a Trappist monk, a college dean, a law student, a civil engineer, a zoology graduate, a teacher, an assistant warden at a Texas prison, and even a surgeon in the Royal Canadian Navy. In the Navy, he served on the Canadian destroyer, the Cayuga, during the Korean War, and successfully sutured wounds and performed surgery on wounded men. He faced charges of fraud, forgery, theft, and embezzlement. In 1960, a movie titled The Great Imposter, starring Tony Curtis, was made about his fraudulent life. He died at the age of 60 in California. On the afternoon of Sunday, February 13, 1977, two Manville boys were playing along the Blackstone and attempted to cross the river. The thin ice gave way, and both boys plunged into 15 feet of water. 10-year-old Mark LaBelle managed to pull himself out, but his friend, 11-year-old Warren J. Scott Jr., slipped under the ice and was swept away by the current. More than 40 rescue workers and policemen rushed to the river with boats and diving equipment.
So we mobilized on the Blackstone River and started doing our search. We started in the northern part up along where Gene's Body Works is now, along the railroad right-of-way, and had people in the water. We had people in boats. Well, the first day we did not find the young boy, so we canceled out everything around 11 o'clock, between 11 o'clock and 12 o'clock at night. So the following day, we remobilized along the both sides of the Blackstone River. I was out in one of the boats with Walter Comeyer and Dennis O'Clair, and we had a set of grappling hooks that we were using. Well, anyway, we were going along, and I don't know exactly what time it was, but we did snag onto something. And I was at the back of the boat with the hooks, and we pulled up, and we did have at the time the young boy, who was dressed in winter coat and fully clothed. And he actually was about 50 feet south of where he actually went in the water. And we signaled to everybody who was on both sides of the Blackstone River that we had found the body. And then we proceeded to the Cumberland side, where we put the young boy in the rescue.
Embrassez-moi, ma mignonnette, embrassez-moi. Ma mignonnette, embrassez-moi, ma mignonnette, embrassez-moi. Non, non, monsieur, je n'oserais des choux, puis des melons, des patates, puis des oignons, puis des groseilles, puis encore un petit verre de vin languille, du boudin, du tabac, des allumettes. Puis encore un petit verre de vin languille, du boudin, du tabac, des allumettes.
In the Pleasant View section of Cumberland Hill, it was fashionable to extend clotheslines between the houses. It was typical to see 8-person privies set up back to back, with each tenant having his own quarters.
Puis encore un petit verre de vin languille, du boudin, du tabac, des allumettes. Puis encore un petit verre de vin languille, du boudin, du tabac, des allumettes. Mais qui la belle lui dirait, mais qui la belle lui dirait, mais qui la belle lui dirait, mais qui la belle lui dirait. Ce sont tous les oiseaux des bois, des choux, des melons, des patates, puis des oignons, puis des groseilles. Puis encore un petit verre de vin languille, du boudin, du tabac, des allumettes. Puis encore un petit verre de vin languille, du boudin, du tabac, des allumettes. Les oiseaux des bois parlent pas, les oiseaux des bois parlent pas. Les oiseaux des bois parlent pas, les oiseaux des bois parlent pas. Ils le diront à ton papa, les choux, puis des melons, des patates, puis des oignons, puis des groseilles. Puis encore un petit verre de vin languille, du boudin, du tabac, des allumettes.
The Enrico Caruso Club started in Manville in 1917. Construction of the club was completed in 1923.
They started working on that in about 1920s, and it was built all by the members of the society and their families. And at that time, only the Italian men from the village of Manville could become members of the Enrico Caruso Society.
They held social events to raise money for the society.
The women that week were always down here making homemade macaroni and spreading it out all over the tables to dry it out and make sure they're getting ready for those things. And it was always a 7-course dinner they give, from soup to nuts. It was something that to behold.
Et encore un petit verre de vin languille, du boudin, du tabac, des allumettes. Et encore un petit verre de vin languille,
Unfortunately, fire has destroyed many historic structures in the village. But if we look carefully, we can still see evidence of some of Manville's history, some of its clues to the past. The Mussey Brook still flows, and we can imagine the Wilkinson Forge creating iron implements along its banks. The Handy Pond Preserve is a natural treasure to be enjoyed by fishermen, hikers, and bird watchers.